So lastly, I also do a little snippet about a women's basketball history. However, today there was an event that happened on Sunday that I want to just throw out there. Fred Williams, who is currently the head coach of the LA Sparks, is a regular on our Zoom. However, like I said, he has a game today. But Sunday evening or Sunday, this past Sunday, the Sparks went and played the Washington Mystics. They defeated the Mystics 79-76. They then went to the airport. He said they got to the airport around 6. Their flight was delayed. They waited and waited till 9. They waited again. It got delayed twice. Finally, at 1:00 a.m., which is now Monday morning, their flight was rebooked to Monday at 9 a.m. because the crew was too tired. Meanwhile, the Sparks were in the Dulles Airport in Virginia, and they each had been offered.
Recording in progress.
However, they could not all stay in the same hotel. The hotels were all booked. So about half the team actually accepted the hotel room, but the rest of them, especially, I got this story from reading and talking to Fred, but Nneka Ogwumike, who's one of the stars, posted a video of her traipsing through the airport. Some of them elected to stay there and sleep in the airport. The assistant coach there posted a picture on Twitter of the airport, the chairs you sit in right before you board the plane, saying that was their bed for the night. So about half the team spent the night having to sleep in the airport, got on the flight at 9 o'clock. They arrived in LA about 12 noon yesterday. Obviously, they did not have practice yesterday. So tonight, they're hosting Connecticut, and this is the last week of the regular season. The Sparks still have a chance to make the playoffs, but when you don't have a good night's rest, and due to the prohibitive costs, the WNBA does not have chartered flights for the teams. But the league, according to the commissioner who announced before the All-Star game, the league will charter for all finals. And they might also opt to charter when the playoffs start and the teams are crossing multiple time zones with limited time between games. Now, earlier this year, the New York Liberty were fined $500,000 for using charters last season. So they sort of, went behind the back and did use some charters. So they got fined, but the biggest issue is this. Number one, do you think the NBA players are spending the night at the airport lounge? No, they all chartered. I mean, can you see people like Kevin Durant or Luka Doncic, having to sleep in the airport lounges? No. And it's a safety and health concern, really. And what Nneka said it best, she goes, in order for the W to be a transformational type of league, they need help in eliminating their toughest opponent they face every year. The toughest opponent, that's travel, because they can't charter. Now, I just want to relay this story. You could go on ESPN.com and read more about it, but hey, let's face it, it's time for the W to up it, have all the teams charter. And this is the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Let's get it done. Let's get some sponsors. Let's get some owners that are financially responsible for the health and safety of their players, and let's do it for the best players in the world. And that's my women's basketball history, although it is her story. After Fred told me all this, he hadn't slept much. He was in his car at 12 noon yesterday, driving to a food court to get something to eat, and then he said he was going to go to sleep. But lastly, can I just say this? I know some of you may think I got a little crazy, but let's bring Brittany Griner home soon, quick, ASAP. And that's the end of my session. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Colleen. Well put. Very well put. And that's an unbelievable story about the Sparks, man. That should open up a lot of eyes.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will turn on the fundraising for that, if that's what needs to happen. Well, now it brings me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today. This grinder was a 4-year manager for St. John's women's and then men's basketball. She was then video intern for Tara Vanderveer at Stanford. then the Cal video coordinator for 2 seasons under Sharman Smith. And then the Forbes article said you were the first Asian American coach on a men's basketball Power 5 staff, which I'm still kind of fact checking, but I thought I would say that it came from Forbes. And that was for Fred Hoiberg with Nebraska men's basketball. And then now the Dallas Mavericks special assistant to head coach Jason Kidd. Please welcome, this is a grinder with a capital G, an outstanding coach, a humble, genuine, amazing human being, and I would say the true embodiment of the growth mindset. Please welcome Shannan Lum.
Woo!
Matt, thank you for that way too kind introduction. I don't deserve half of that. And before we get started with the questions and answers, I wanted to just take a moment and thank you and Colleen for, one, having me, and then 2, doing this, because at the end of the day, like I joked about it, but like, I don't think I should be the one you guys are talking to. But I wasn't doing this 2 years ago with you guys during COVID. Like I was listening to all of these Zooms, trying to take notes and trying to learn, and the growth mindset, it wasn't a concept I understood as like a term until you guys put it out there. So I just want to thank you for taking that time and having me join and just doing this for everyone that, you know, they may not have an open path to a mentor or leadership. So you guys are, kudos to you. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Shannan. And we're so happy that you're able to join today. You've been, like you said, along the whole way and starting with the early Zooms, and you've just been on a rocket straight up. So we're gonna, just to let the coaches know kind of the format, Colleen and I are gonna ask questions. We've got a group of questions we're gonna ask Coach for about 15, 20 minutes. And then afterward, we're gonna do a Q&A. So unless there's something specific about a certain question, let's just hold all the Q&A till the very end. And then make sure you're also muted so that the background noise doesn't interfere with the speaker. So let's see. I will go ahead and start with the first question. Shannan, did you tell us about your playing history, and did you ever think about playing collegiate basketball, or tell us how all that went?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I was mediocre at best in high school. Never had any intention of playing college. I later on, like my junior, senior year, some people brought up the JUCO route, and I kind of pondered that idea. But at the time, the school and the people I kind of grew up with, that wasn't talked about. Like it was always like 4-year university, like you just stop playing sports and you just go to school. So at the time, I only knew you got to go to 4-year university or you're deemed, a failure. So to answer your question short, no, I had no intention of playing college basketball. I didn't even know I could be a manager at a D1 school. Like that never occurred to me. I just was thinking I'll go to school, learn, and then find my way into AAU coaching, because I had been doing that as a high schooler, like helping out with that. So I figured I'd just come back to the Bay Area after school and become an AAU coach and go down that path.
Okay, so Shannan, as a native of the Bay Area in California, what enticed you to go to college across the country at St. John's University in New York? And when you went there, what was your major and intended career goal?
Got to give all the credit to my mother. She, one, is the reason I even feel the confidence or somewhat confidence to go after my dreams. But 2, she lived in New York and worked there at one point in her life. So instead of most kids getting to go to LA and like go to a beach or Disneyland for vacation, her idea of vacation was like, oh, you'll come with me on a work trip and you get to walk around Manhattan all day. Like that was what I thought vacationing was, walking around and watching her shop. So that I fell in love with it. Like Broadway shows, just a bright light. So I fell in love with New York at a young age. So when I had the opportunity, St. John's kind of happened to be one of the schools that fit that for me, which was they had sport management as a major and they had a master's program for that, one of the first schools to do that. So I knew that they were well versed in that subject. And then 2, just getting a chance to live in New York in like a safer, like being in the dorm on the campus, that type of environment. And I was under the impression if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. So foolishly went into that, but no, I don't regret it. It's been great.
Great.
Now, Shannan, during your
And
time,
then,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, you're good. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, during your time at St. John's, you started with the women's team, and then after a couple of years transitioned to the men's program. Talk about getting involved with both.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I didn't even know I could be a manager. Like at the time, it was starting to become some like headlines came out about the people behind the scenes of college teams. So by the time I got to St. John's, I was kind of like just wandering. I was just an average student wandering around, going to class and then going back to my dorm at lunch and not knowing what I'm doing with my life to some degree. But luckily, a couple of people that I met through the rec center were like, oh, like you should just be a manager then if you love basketball so much. And I was like, what is that? So lo and behold, I like kind of do some research, figure out managers are like helping out. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Like that'll utilize my time better. So I bothered the coach at St. John's for so long that he finally got one of his managers to meet me, and I like tried out to be a manager for a month and a half. And then they're like, yeah, you can just join us. So that was awesome. I got to do 2 years with the women's side. We were able to, I got to experience some really cool things in terms of friendships, relationships with coaching staff members and players, and just learning. Like that's the beauty of like college and just growing up. It's the diversity you get to meet when you get outside of your niche. Like if you're in high school, you're stuck with a certain amount of people. College opened up the world to me in some aspects. So that was really cool getting to meet new people, and especially internationally. What got me to go to the men's side was a lot of bothering and persistence for sure. But I had noticed that the men's managers kind of had more responsibility. They seemed to be more needed. And at the time I felt like I needed to learn more. So I needed to be like in an environment where there are like needed managers around. And if they got me sort of in the room, I'd figure out the rest. So I, again, bothered people, and I got to try out to be a manager for the men's team over the summer. And luckily they decided to keep me. And I'm sure the Bay Area connection of Chris Mullen being the head coach at the time didn't hurt me so that he was open to it. And coincidentally enough, he actually had an Asian manager who was a woman when he was playing. So he was like, yeah, of course, be a manager. I was like, really? He's like, yeah. I'm used to it. I was like, all right, cool. So that's something I was fortunate with, like a coach that had that open-mindedness, and he didn't see Asian woman. He was just like, can you get the job done? And lo and behold, that's how it kind of happened.
And did you sleep on some couch overnight to try to get to the men's? What was the story with that? Was that legend or?
I was trying to be like respectful of everyone's time and not go into like the nitty gritty of that. But yes, in terms of like, you guys want to know the grind that I went through as a student, what is it? So it's my sophomore year going to junior year. Season's ended. So we're somewhere in April and May. I'm talking to the men's coaches, and they were like giving me the runaround, like, yeah, like, sure, we'll talk about it. The men's managers, they're not really sure because like they don't know any better. They're just kind of giving me the runaround as well. And luckily I just bothered enough people where I'm like, hey, can I just sit in your practice or just watch your workouts? And I just made sure I was like attentive in those workouts, took my notes, and just showed that I was committed to being there. Like if I'm just going to sit there and watch you all day, you might as well have me go help you, like the way I saw it. So I get a call. Oh, they're like, oh, in the summertime, we're going to have workouts. Are you going to be around? And I was like, I didn't have any intention because the women's team doesn't usually have the manager stick around because of cost. And at the time I didn't have an apartment there. I was still living on campus. So they were like, well, if you can find a way to be here in the month of, I want to say maybe it was like August till September, or no, July to August. If you can be here for that month, that'll be your tryout period. And we'll see if we'll keep you for the season. And I was like, okay, sure. Like I said, thankfully for the relationships I created with the women's team, they had an apartment and they were like, yeah, you can stay on the couch. And I was like, great. Who was just talking about, oh, Diane, were you just talking about being in a dorm with no AC and it was 110 degrees?
Yes.
She's on, but someone was talking about that. So I was sitting on 3 of the players lived together. So I slept on their couch and there was no AC. And weirdly enough, one of the players' brothers also was staying there. So he was on one end of the couch and I was on the other end of the couch. So it wasn't like I even had privacy on the couch. We were just sleeping on the couch together. Like my feet are facing his feet. And like I don't know what he was doing, but like he was trying to be a soccer player on the team or some other school. So he would get up at like the weirdest hours of the night to work out because he didn't want to be in the heat. So at like 3, 4 in the morning, I'd like wake up and see him wandering around in the dark. And it's like hot and I'm sweating and I'm just all dazed and confused. And then I had to walk like 30 minutes to the practice facility and the like dripping sweat. I should have lost like 20 pounds that summer. I assume I lost 20 pounds that summer with the amount of sweat I was dripping. So that was really exciting. The cockroaches, all that. I'm going to spare some of the details, but to say the least, I paid my dues in that sense for sure. And I don't take any of it for granted.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Thanks for bringing that up. I try not to think about that. Waking up with a cockroach next to your face.
Oh.
I don't wish that on anyone like that.
Wow.
Although Diddy apparently woke up with like 10 cockroaches on his chest. I heard that story recently and I was like, all right, Diddy beat me. That's why Diddy's Diddy and I'm still what I'm doing because like he woke up with 10 on his chest. I just woke up with it next to my face. So we're on different wavelengths right now.
Wow. Wow.
Well, great story.
Yeah, Shannon, after you graduated from St. John's, you then interned for the 2018-2019 season at Stanford as a video coordinator to Tara Vanderveer's team. What are a few takeaways you learned working for the Hall of Famer?
Oh, wow. It's a lot. I mean, I was kind of witnessing, it was funny because like we used to joke about it. That was one of like the weaker teams that Tara had in her career. Like they had maybe been 2 years off, or they had just come off of a really bad season. And when Stanford says a really bad season, that means like we go to the Sweet 16 and we just don't go to the Elite 8, which is like bizarre to me, right? Because some teams can't even make the tournament. So like, yeah, when they say weaker teams, I'm just like, no, you're still elite, but that's cool. Her work ethic, you know, I'm joining Tara and her staff after she's done 30 years of this, right? And you would think there's coaches that when you've done what Tara's done, she's probably cruising. Everyone's thinking she's just having the time of her life, and she is, but it's not with the lack of work ethic that she had or has. Like, you know, the amount of film that she watches, and you'd think, do you have anything else you got going on in your life? And she does, but she just loves watching film so much. Like I remember I used to drop off games at her house, and she'd have a Warriors game playing while her computer is running with a Stanford practice. And I'm just like, man, like you just love this way too much. Like I love it. I love watching her because she's just like, she gets so giddy about it. And she's not like afraid to talk to anyone about, like, it doesn't matter what level you're at. There is no like hierarchy to her. I know she still talks to anyone that reaches out about, you know, questions about her program, her offenses or whatever. And then she talks to anyone who has something that she likes. And that's something that kind of opened my eyes. Like even at Tara's level, you would think she kind of has like, oh, I don't really care about this anymore. No, she's still open to anything. If it intrigues her, she's going to ask you questions. Doesn't matter what level you're at. And that's kind of part of like never stop learning, like that she's always about learning. So that was really cool to see for someone, you know, at her stature. She's a competitor. That's another thing. You think like, all right, you're the winningest head coach. I truly believe she'll go until she like can't be beat, which is crazy to me. So it's pretty cool seeing her competitive side and how she tries to bring that out of the players every night. Yeah, that's.
Now, following your internship at Stanford, you got hired as the video coordinator at Cal women's basketball beginning in 2019 for 2 seasons till May 2021. And it was during this time that we met, of course. What were some of the takeaways you learned working for Sharman, who had played under Tara? And then I have a follow-up as well.
Okay. So learning from Sharman, I think what she did a great job of is taking the tough love that Tara had and implementing that with the kids at Cal, but also like, I think there's like a generational factor to some degree of just like Tara's generation versus like now, especially now's generation, like completely different, right? So I think Charmin really went out of her way to try to mend that generational gap with the kids, get to know them a lot more in depth. I didn't know her when she was an assistant at Cal, but the way I saw her as what I've heard of her as an assistant, and then what I saw as a head coach, is like she really went out of her way to create those relationships with each player, so much so that like she'd run through a wall for them and they battled their butts off every night for her on the court. Like if you guys looked up our record, like we were god awful, and it was not for a lack of trying. Like we competed every single game, whether we could control the score or not. That was something that was really like fascinating to me to see, is like even on game 25, when like you guys understand, right? 10-game lose streak, and you're like, yeah, these kids are done. They're like over it. They're ready for spring break. No, our kids were competing every single day. And I thought that was, a tribute to Charmin putting in her time and growing her relationships with those kids to where they wanted to go to bat for her no matter what. And kudos to those kids too. Like the players, they really cared. So it was really fascinating to watch that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the follow-up question, just talk about the video room as a career path, and how that kind of came about, and when you decided that was going to be your ultimate way.
Yeah, I was fortunate at St. John's to work for people who had played in the NBA, been in the NBA at some capacity of coaching or player development, and kind of through talking to people, you kind of realize if you're not a player, the video room is kind of your only chance to grow and get trusted with, like, yeah, you know what you're talking about. So at the time, that was the only route I thought would make sense. And then it just gives you a chance to grow, like, your understanding of the game if you have to watch it all the time. So that's where I was going with it. I knew since I wasn't a player, there's a lot of credibility lacking. So if I had the video room experience, that would help me. And then just being able to grow in that position to the best of my abilities, I figured it would take me wherever I needed to go, and trust that it would.
Good. Okay, so Shannan, then while you were at Cal, you interviewed for a position as men's basketball recruiting coordinator at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Go Big Red. Can you briefly describe to us the process, about like the timeline, your job responsibilities, some obstacles you might have met along the way?
Yeah, so that one, it kind of came out of left field. We're in the midst of going back into possibly a normal year again. Well, however you can think of normal. But we had just finished the COVID season, which was, treacherous for anyone who had to experience that or not even experience it. And I knew the director of basketball operations and one of the assistant coaches who was more of the recruit, who was more of the recruiting coach. Can you guys hear me still?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I knew two staff members at the time who was at Nebraska, and they had just, honestly, I think the reason why I got the interview was because they trusted my work ethic. Like I had no reason to be a recruiting coordinator, but what I've learned in my experiences of getting the jobs I have gotten, none of the jobs I've gotten I was ever really primed to do, with the exception of Cal being the video coordinator. I did the video internship at Stanford, but from my internship, I didn't do video when I was at St. John's. But my work ethic and my ability to gain the trust of the people I worked for afforded me the opportunity when Tara called Chris Mullen and like said, hey, tell me about the Shannan character. Like, he was like, yeah, she'd be fine. Don't worry about her not knowing video. Like, she's going to learn it. And then Tara also knowing, growing the process of like, you don't have to be a star in that role yet. That's why you're here, is to learn that role and then go on and, attack the next role. So sorry, I'm getting there somewhere with this, I promise. So with Nebraska, I had built a lot of credibility with the coach and the Dobo that knew me, so that when Fred Hoiberg asked, like, hey, I need some candidates, like, I want to make this position, can someone fill this role? They didn't think like, oh, she knows exactly what to do about recruiting men's future men's basketball players at Power 5. Like, no one ever said that was going to be the case. But they knew if there's someone that's going to be able to figure it out, I would be able to do that. So that's kind of where the work ethic I had and the credibility I had, they were like, all right, like you should interview for this job. And with Charmin's blessing, I did interview, and then I got it luckily with Coach Hoiberg, and again, comes from great references of my past staff, because I think that was huge. Like Charmin went to bat for me too. Having your staff that's supporting you to go get that next job, that's really important, because some coaches, you know, I've heard horror stories where they're like, you can't leave, or if you do this, like I'm cutting you off. And
Right.
you know, that I don't think that's what this game's about. Like same way you want your players to succeed, whether it's a transfer portal or not, like you got to find ways to support them. It may not benefit you in the moment, but if they grow, that's your tree. That's what, like Tara, sorry, going back to this, Tara, like her tree or coaching tree is so large that people don't even know that like they're connected to Tara. Like, and that's what I think is fascinating. She doesn't claim every single person like, yeah, I'm the reason why this person got that job, but I'll always say it. Like, without Tara, I don't get Cal. That's just point blank, right? Like Tara made the call and confirmed that, like, yeah, she can do the job. Tara has gotten other people. I have a coworker at Stanford. She ended up getting a job at UCSD right after. And then became an assistant coach at Portland State. Like there's just so many trees and things that Tara had her hands in, but no one ever knows about it. So I think that was huge, is that your work ethic and then having the right support system to kind of push you and say, hey, she can figure this out. She may not have done the job yet, but she'll be able to figure it out for you. So I think that's what I got really lucky with.
Well, I don't think it was luck entirely. It's because you're a grinder, Shannan, and you know that speaks for itself. But were your parents supportive of your career moves? I mean, first Stanford, then Cal, and now Nebraska, in the middle of the Midwest.
Yeah, so Stanford and Cal weren't too much of an issue for them, because I had already like broken their hearts going to St. John's to pursue coaching. So like that already was like its own. I had to like make an Excel spreadsheet explaining that you could live like, no, like this is, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, I'm a senior in high school. I've applied to 13 colleges. Let's also preface this by saying I wasn't exactly the most like ideal student, and like I didn't have my life together at that point. All I wanted to do was coach basketball. My parents were like, that's not a career for you. Like you don't even play. I'm like, yeah, I get it, but it's fine. We'll figure it out. So I was graduating and I applied to 13 schools. 12 of them or 11 of them were for like sports med. I was going to go be a PT and then figure out med school and, you know, live the typical like successful, fulfilled Asian life, whatever, you know, medical or business. And so last minute, I'm like, oh, but St. John's, it fits like everything I want to do. New York, sport, like, come on, I got to do it. And so my mom's like, if you're going to do this, you need to prove to me that you can like figure out how to live. And I was like, all right. So I had to make an Excel spreadsheet showing the income and like, forget like how I could eventually make some type of money to live like comfortably to where she doesn't have to pay for the rest of my life. And I was like, all right, so I figured that out. You guys are laughing because you're like, ha, what money? I know. I just had to fudge it a little bit to make it look feasible for her. But luckily got past that hump. And then Stanford and Cal, like I said, that wasn't too much of like a struggle for them because I got to go home. And then I mean, Warren was a full-time job, so that was like good enough for them at the time. Nebraska did start to like, they started to question me a little bit, only because one, it was like right after like COVID-esque, like that peak. So they were nervous about me leaving in that aspect. And then the second was with college men's basketball, well, any college athletics, nothing's guaranteed, especially for our roles in like support staff, right? Like if you're an assistant or a head coach, you got some leeway, but like nothing's guaranteed. So they were like, are you like, what if you get fired right after like the season? I'm like, yeah, that could happen. Like that could happen. But the way I see it is like, you got to bet on yourself at some point. And I did. So they eventually got over that. And then Dallas, they were fine with that too. That one wasn't too bad. My dad just jokes that I don't get him enough tickets. So like that's our running joke with him. But other than that worked out for us. Yeah. So
now, Shannan, you've got,
they are supportive.
That's awesome. Now you've got some really good experience both with men's programs and women's programs. Can you kind of talk about what your likes and dislikes are on each side?
Yeah. I think overall with like college athletics, the similarities in terms of just the process, you know, the workouts, the kids, the visits, like you're dealing with 16 or 17 to 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds coming into a new environment for the most part, right? There might be a couple kids that know more than others, and then there's kids that have like no idea what they're doing. So no matter what side or what gender you're dealing with a very formidable youth. So like you have to embrace either I'm going to be someone that helps teach you like, you know, how to figure out your rest of your life, or you don't have to get involved. I think there's like other staff members I've met that like that's just they don't think that's their role, so they don't embrace it. For me, I thought that was part of my role, is to make sure I could be a connector between our coaching staff and our players, because I was in between that age gap where I just graduated, so I knew what they're going through, and then I'm a young adult trying to pursue a coaching career. But going back to it, running the visits, adapting to being adults, teaching them good habits and life lessons. I think that's all the same. Doesn't matter what age, what gender, and level. I think the difference is, and I kind of like, I fight this a little bit when I say it out loud, but like the intensity on the men's side versus the women's side, and granted, it might have been COVID, like to that extent, but I feel like you had to almost, or it wasn't just COVID, it was before that, but like you almost had to like will women's players to care more about like practices and embracing the good habits of that. Whereas guys, I think it's like a do or die for them sometimes. And I'm not quite sure where that stems from, because some people are from the same background and like, experiences, but I always felt like, and maybe it's because women aren't encouraged enough to do this, to pursue this athletic career, so they don't see like the bright end of the tunnel. I think that would be like my one understanding of that. And then just the hunger. And then there's a difference when it comes to the financial backing, because I got to see it like Cal versus Stanford, both women, but there's a difference in financial backing of like what could or could not be done. And then men, like with Nebraska, I kind of saw that, and I think I don't know if that's really a women's men's thing versus just like a general, like where you are as a school and a university, which was a big difference. Like Nebraska, like that's all there is. It's Nebraska football, basketball, and volleyball. And Nebraska is everything. Whereas like at Cal, you're in the middle of Berkeley and like no one cares if you play basketball or if you're like the star. Like we have Olympic athletes and no one would care at Berkeley. Same with Stanford. Like the women's, like the swim and dive team would be champions, and like, yeah, well, someone built a robot across the street, so like you're not anything compared to that. So that was kind of like the difference of like witnessing that. But yeah, I would say those are the kind of the similarities and differences I felt.
Okay. Well, so now currently, let's talk about you today, Shannan. Your official title is Special Assistant to the Head Coach, who's Jason Kidd with the NBA Dallas Mavericks. So tell us, briefly about the sequence of events where then the Dallas Mavericks entered the picture for you. Like you had, I know I had talked to you. You had just moved to Lincoln, gotten your apartment furniture, and then when I tried to reach you, I was going to come visit you. In fact, remember? And then you said,
I remember.
I have something to tell you. I had already bought my ticket, and Shannan says, I'm leaving. I go, what do you mean you're leaving? So go ahead, Shannan. Take it from there.
I'm sorry about that, by the way. When I make enough money, I will reimburse you for that ticket. I'm going to be honest. I'm not at that point in my life yet. I will own it when I am. But I'll make it up to you in Dallas. I'll pick you up. You can stay with me on my couch, whatever you want. Yeah, so that process, that one really caught me off guard. Like when they say like some things, what's it saying? Like the best happens or unexpected things happen. Yeah, that was very unexpected. So their season had ended late. So the draft process, when they were doing draft night last year, was later than what they did this year, right? Because of the schedule and stuff and COVID. So we're having a draft party for our players. It's the summertime, all the players are here. We're going to a draft party just to watch the draft and keep it as like a team bonding event. And our director of ops, who's a huge mentor to me, by the way, Luca Virgilio, he texted me. He was like, "Hey, meet me like earlier." I'm like, "All right, well, I'm already going to be there early." But he was like, No, meet me earlier." I was like, "Okay." And so he sat me down, and he's got this suspicious looking face just because like I know him well. So he's like gonna either break my heart or like tell me something really crazy. And so we sit down, and he's like, "Greg called me," and Greg, we worked with at St. John's. So again, a lot of my opportunities are afforded through the work ethic and to the connection I had at St. John's. So Greg St. Jean, who is now an assistant coach for the Dallas Mavericks, newly hired under Jason Kidd, had called Luca and basically told him that Coach Kidd was looking for a special assistant, and Greg threw my name in the ring, or wanted to throw my name in the ring. But because we are all close, like Luca's really close with Greg, and we had that relationship, he went to Luca first to get his, his blessing before he went, because he knew I just got to Nebraska. So I was fortunate enough that Luca, he went out of his way to help me get that job in Nebraska, went out of his way to make me acclimated with Nebraska. And so for someone to call and be like, "Hey, can we take her away possibly?" Like, he could have easily cut that rope quickly. And I was fortunate that like Luca, he wanted the best for me. So he was like, "Yeah, of course, like she needs to interview if she can." And I went through the interview process with Coach Kidd, and then ended up meeting Nico Harrison, the GM, on the Zoom. And from there, I think he just felt comfortable with my background in being able to just handle different jobs, like operations with St. John's, did video, Cal and Stanford. And I had actually some good recommendations out of that job too. And then coincidentally enough, the team he now runs, his AAU program, Jason Kidd Select, used to be called Golden City, and they're based out of San Francisco. Golden City is where I started coaching in high school. So without knowing, like, I didn't know Jason Kidd from that or anything, because by the time I had left Golden City, I was in college, all that stuff. I had to disassociate myself with any AAU because of the women's basketball, the rules. So coincidentally enough, that my resume had always had Golden City on it up until I sent my resume to the Dallas Mavericks, because I finally had Nebraska. So I had to like erase something from my resume. And so I erased Golden City. And like, I'm talking to Coach Kidd, and I said, he's looking at my resume. He's like, "Oh, so you were here and here." And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, coincidentally enough, you're the only person that would have known what Golden City was. I took it off my resume, but you're the only one who would have known what it was. And then that weekend, Golden City, or Jason Kidd Select, was in town for AAU tournament. And so the director of that, Armando Pazos, he and J Kidd were talking, and I think he also kind of endorsed me in that way, in terms of my work ethic when I was in high school. And I think from there, J Kidd just felt comfortable enough with me to give me a shot. So I was so fortunate in that. So as you can see, everyone, my job career and all that sprinting up the ladder, it's all pure luck, just pure luck and coincidence.
It was made to be in the cosmos.
It's all the organic relationships that you built all along the way, Shannan. Every single person that you come in contact with, you learn from, and they so highly respect you, and that's how it is. You just been all along the way. You're just amazing person. Anyways, I'll stop my ranting on that. So Shannan, on the next question, can you describe your job duties and maybe like a typical game day, both like a home and road?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny, like the job is like being a Swiss Army knife, is what we like to call it with the Mavs. It's someone that can just handle everything. I'm not like the queen, I'm not the master of anything, but I can do the jack of all trades. And that's where I've always kind of created value for other staff members. And all of the stops I've been at, it's like no job is too big or too small for me. So with that being said, we had a new organization change in terms of they've had a long-term GM and a long-term head coach, to the point that like it hasn't happened in a long time that we've had that long. I think that Miami and the Spurs are the only other two organizations with longer tenured front office and head coaches. So for them, it was like a kind of a big culture shift. Luckily they brought back someone they knew in J Kidd, but like prior to that, you know, it's just like a lot of people are kind of like, well, what do we do from here? Because it's always been this way. And that's where I kind of got to come in and help create the new culture and creating the new culture, because we're still building on it. That's one of my roles, is kind of just, it's hard to describe, but picking up on things. I'm like, all right, do we still do it this way because like it's the most functional and like thought out way, or is it just because that's how they've always done it? And like, do we still need to do that? Is there another way to do this and get the results we're looking for in a more efficient manner, effective manner? And it's small things. It can be big or small, and just asking questions and getting to know different staff members who have been there long term, just got here, whatever it may be, but creating that dynamic and relationship, that's part of my job. I do a lot of videos still, like in terms of in season, 70% of my job was still cutting up film, helping our video coordinators with scouting, and learning from them and our assistant coaches on their process of scouting. So that's where I've kept my like basketball mind growing with them. This year was just, hey, learn what the NBA looks like. This coming year, it's like, all right, now that you've gotten a feel of your first season, let's kind of hit the ground running with you and see what else you can add to it. So this is a big year for me to grow. But yeah, so most of my job in season is video, and then there's like whatever J Kidd needs. That should have been the preface of my job description. He's just a very low maintenance guy, so sometimes I forget. I'm like, dude, can I do anything else for you? And he's like, no, I'm good right now. I'm like, all right, like if you say so. But trying to also like project like what else he might need. What does he need to think about? How can he, you know, find ways to make him look really good? Like, he's already a great guy. How can I also make him look like he cares, you know, and what do we got to do? Whether it's small things like making sure our staff members are getting birthday gifts now, like that may have never been a thing, but like, how can we show that we care about our staff members so that they can go a little bit further, go the extra mile for J Kidd in return, and our team in return? Because it's easy to get like carried away with everything in your life to where like you forget there's people under you that are struggling, whether it's in NBA or in college or high school or, you know, AAU. There's a lot of people grinding out here just for the love of the game. But like, you know, if you have the fortitude to kind of afford them some love, how can I help you do that? And so that's what I try to do for a coach. And then your other question was, oh, game day. Game day usually at home looks like I'm in the office around 6:30, 7 a.m. We'll have shoot around at 10 a.m. Usually the games are like 7 or 8 o'clock. So we'll have shoot around at 10 a.m. And then from there, most guys will do like a little bit of shooting afterwards, but they all kind of get out of there so they can get their like long naps in. For us, support staff and assistant coaches, we'll probably go work. We'll continue working. So it's prepping for that scout, what you're showing. Like, a lot of things in the NBA, I didn't realize this was kind of like not last minute, but like they don't, for us, like we'll have our scouts like night before, like sometimes they just wait till a couple hours before the game to have all their final edits, because sometimes there's a guy that leaves or drops out of the game for their reason, injury, trade. That was a wild time when you didn't know who was on the team. So try to get a workout in, and then if you're lucky, you can get a nap in if you're not overwhelmed with work. Come back to the arena about 3 hours before the game. And then it varied. So at the beginning of the year, I was really in depth with like pregame warmups. But then as the season started to get heavier, a lot of my scout games were during the warmup. So I would be cutting scout games instead of helping on the court. So it just varied. And then making sure coach had his stuff, pregame materials. We do like minutes matrix. Does he have his play call sheet? Does he have whatever ATO after action stuff he needs? And then during the game, I'm either cutting the scout game, so I'm not even watching our game, or if I do get a chance to watch our game, I'm in the video room with support staff and kind of like building relationships with them, and then also just learning from them because they've been doing this for so many years. So it's kind of cool to like hear their thoughts, because you don't, in the game, I'll be honest, like you can't see anything when you're standing behind the bench. And I'm 5'2". I was just joking about this with the coach this morning, but like I must be the shortest person in the NBA. Like I have to be. So there's like no need for me to be out there when we had Boban Marjanovic sitting on the bench and I couldn't see past his head. So like I never went out there. There was no need for me to be out there. So I kicked it back in the video room. My humble my safe space.
Well,
But
I
yeah,
kept
that's
looking
kind
for
of
you.
how it is at home. Yeah, so we have a Asian athletic trainer. So she sits either at the front of the bench, like the right next to Coach Kidd, or she'll sit somewhere at the end of the bench. And so every time, not every time, once every so often, I'd get a text like, "Hey, are you on the bench right now?" I'm like, "No, it's not me. It's another Asian. But thanks for asking." Like, it's a joke, but like, I appreciate everyone thinking it's me. I'm like, "No, it's a way cooler Asian." But
Me
yeah,
included.
so
I thought that was you
maybe
too.
the bench.
Yeah. I thought it was you too.
Yeah,
Shannon's
no,
on the bench because, they rarely just scan the bench. And so I go, wow, that was exciting. Now, you were able to
yeah.
travel with the team to the Western Conference Finals against the Golden State Warriors, your hometown team. Were you secretly
Yes.
Warriors? No, no. What kind of experience was that? Just being in that playoff atmosphere and and as a follow-up, then you also went to the NBA Summer League in Las Vegas, right? So that
Yeah.
was another new experience, right?
Yeah. So I was really so grateful to Coach Kidd. Like, he does care about who works for him and his staff. So when they did go, they went straight from Phoenix Game 7 to Golden State. So I wasn't at Phoenix Game 7 at the time. I had done Utah, but then Phoenix, I didn't go. They took someone else. And then from there, they went straight to Golden State. So I got a call the next day, like, "Hey, Coach Kidd would like for you to come out. Can you like hop on a flight, find one, and then like meet us at the hotel?" So like, I'm like, "Yeah, of course, whatever you guys want." So I get on a flight and I get to go out there, and it's just like, it's surreal. I think there's only a few times where I could say there's like that welcome to the NBA moment. And I try not to think of it too much, but like, there was one point during the game, and this is probably when we were actually winning in game 2 at one point. So I was like kind of hyped, that I was like, "Man, this is awesome." Like, just things you don't think, like, no one thought we were going to be there. I don't think we thought we were going to be there at one point. So the fact that we got to do that and compete was very surreal. And then I the biggest thing for me was like being able to have my family there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not doing anything in the game in comparison. Like, I did my normal duties when they're on the road. But the fact that I was able to get my parents, like in the room to like watch a game like that, whether they're rooting for Mavericks or the Warriors, I don't know. And I don't want to ask them. But it was pretty cool to have that because, there's only so many things I can do to like show my thanks and appreciation to what they've done for me. So that was, I like to think, is one of them. But yeah, that was cool. And the prep, sorry, going back to basketball, because I know this doesn't matter to the stuff we're talking about, but the prep for playoffs, it's so in depth because you see the team 7 times if you're lucky, right? So the nuances and the changes, it was really cool to witness. I think Golden State was a little different for us. There's like a lot of factors in terms of fatigue, like we're running guys into the ground. But Phoenix and Utah like was really cool to witness, like I didn't realize how much it still goes into the mental. Like, how can you mentally get your guy to step up in a certain moment? And there's small moments that like win you the game. Like, I thought game's over at some point. Whether it's like there's a shot that really does change the momentum of the game, or there's like a play that like, it's not just a shot, it's a certain type of action or play that like changes everything. Because once you see that you can execute that, then you're running at them 100 times, and if they can't guard you, it's too late for them to make the changes. So it was really cool to see that in Western Conference Finals and just prior to that.
Thank you.
And then Shannan, I haven't really even caught up with you after your summer league experience. Can you just talk a little bit about Las Vegas and how that went for you?
Yeah, sorry. Let's see. Vegas, it was really cool because I got to be a coach. Like, in terms of the training camp we did, like we had a staff where they really empowered us. So like the 2 assistant coaches that they've done summer league almost every year of their careers, they were empowering other coaches who at the past have not had that experience. So like myself included, they went out of their way to figure out, all right, Shannan, this is going to be your role for summer league. training camp, like, hey, we need you to pay attention to these details, or someone else needs to pay attention to running the offense. So like they really empowered our video room and myself to be coaches, which, you know, it's not always the case, especially when you're dealing with pros. So that was really cool because I got to do that also for free agent mini camp and pre-draft workouts. Like I got to run a drill for pre-draft workouts, and then the free agent mini camp, I was one of the assistant coaches of like 3 coaches total for that team. So like it was really cool, kind of like, all right, you think you know this stuff and you do, but like doing it, it's still different. Like I was like in charge of making sure we knew the timeouts, knew the ATO situation. And then, you know, do you have the board ready? Like, does your coach know who's in the game? Like I didn't think it mattered, but I realized, like, imagine you're Coach Kid and you got to like draw up an ATO and you only have 2 minutes, like less than 2 minutes, and you don't even know who's on the court at the moment because there's just so many things running through your mind. So doing that in the free agent mini camp was like, I was like, yeah, it's not easy. Like you still have to be like really on top of your game and then making the quick changes. And then if you mess up, your coach isn't going to like blame you in front of everyone. They just got to take the hit. So like trying to be like on your best game. And then same goes for summer league. So to answer your question, that was experience. We had quite a few coaches there. So for a lot of them, they were getting that like head coaching experience or that like front bench assistant coach experience. So I still kind of fell into the video room, but like as like the number 2 video person with another guy. And so in games, I was just coding games. So that was kind of it. But live coding, which is a little different it's been a while since I've had the live code that. So and then getting to coach our guys through the training camp and making sure they understood what we were trying to get done and touch them in terms of film sessions and shoot arounds, like because we got a couple of shoot arounds and workouts in, so like getting a chance to like coach them and not be afraid to like have a voice. Our coaches empowered us to do that, so that was a really cool experience.
That's great.
How awesome. That's great to hear. What do you enjoy most about this current position, would you say? And then maybe what are the biggest challenges?
What I enjoy most is the ability to like create relationships and learn from different coaches and players. I mentioned this with like college. It's like a whole new world. Like you meet people I had a player that was from Spain, from Italy, like just getting different personalities. So it's the same in the NBA, but it's like even more worse because they're older. So they've had a lot more life to live. And then obviously if you're in the NBA as a player, you have a lot more money to live life. So like there's like crazier like experiences that they've had that maybe your average person does not have. Sometimes I joke though that like I can't listen to them too much because like it's just like too bizarre to me that that's even an experience that they have, and they joke about it like it's nothing. And I'm like, that would have been a lifetime experience for me and I wouldn't be able to handle anything else. So getting to create relationships is kind of the biggest thing for me. And I think like in terms of like getting to know you, Matt, it's always been something that helps connect people and makes this job so like worthwhile. It's just meeting new people and creating people that are, or creating relationships with like-minded people and people that they give you different perspectives on life. Because that's a big thing. Like I think if you can't live that life, learning from people who have lived a certain life is really helpful for you to relate back to players or other coaches.
And what would you say some of the biggest challenges you faced in this position? Sorry, Colleen, if I cut you off.
Okay. I forgot that we have the other part. Go ahead.
I think some of the biggest challenges is being strategic in how you are either bringing something new into play or like growing in your role, because like there are different personalities. So like you really have to think like, okay, is this person going to, sorry, my mother's dog. He's protecting our house. Someone's invading, so he's letting everyone know. So there are different personalities. So like for change, especially like with the culture change, like how do you bring something new into a place that's been doing something a certain way for so long? That's been a challenge. And like you can't just throw all these new ideas in, especially like I don't have all the power in the world. Like there are higher ups. So like you got to be able to pick and choose your battles, like what needs to go to them, what can you handle on your own, and then like what do you have the green light to actually do without like bothering other people, because your job is always to make your head coach or your boss's life easier. So you can't keep going to them with all the same questions or same problems. You got to figure out what needs to get to them, what doesn't. So that's been a challenge, because I used to think, well, NBA, like everything's probably fine. It doesn't matter what level you're at, honestly. It's fascinating. I just think the NBA just has more funding. That's what I like to say. Like same, different day.
Yeah.
For sure. Different level, sorry. But that, and then confidence, like I'll admit, like sometimes I question, or all the time I question, like, should I be here? I think you guys have always been huge supporters of me and my experiences, but I have no doubt in my mind there are 100 people, especially even in this Zoom right now, that deserve this job more than me, or deserve the last job more than me, like Cal, Nebraska, all these jobs. Way harder workers, way smarter workers, whatever it may be. So just having that confidence to like continue to grow and not be afraid of like, oh, is this coach doubting me, or am I already psyching myself out before I've even had an opportunity, and then being ready for the next opportunity. Like I'll admit I wasn't prepared for the free agent minicamp. I wasn't prepared to coach. Like I didn't think that was in play until they had mentioned it like a week before, that, hey, you're going to be coaching this. And I'm thinking I'm just going to be like, you know, doing some small stuff. But then, like I told you, I was like, oh, shoot, I need to know who's in the game and be aware of like who's subbing out, and like, oh, this guy's got this many fouls, like things that I'm just like, I know when I'm sitting behind a TV in the video room, like I can keep track of all that. But when you're on the court watching it happen real time, it's a little bit of a different feeling. That pressure's there for sure. And then if players ask you questions, like knowing, what can I say? What am I saying that's accurate? Like you don't want to give the wrong message to a player and then they mention it back like, oh yeah, Shannon told me this, and coaching staff is like, that's not true. Like that's not what we were trying to tell this guy. So that's also like a big thing, is like making sure you echo your coach's message properly, because players, especially the NBA, like they can sniff out BS quickly. So like you either know your stuff or you don't. So like trying to gauge, like make sure I know my stuff, it is sometimes intimidating and a challenge.
Yeah. Well, Shannan, being an Asian American female, have you ever been treated negatively on either the men's basketball or the women's basketball side?
Fortunately, I haven't
had
any like in-person experience or like personal experience in that nature. I hear the sly comments every now and then, and it's less maybe about the Asian, but just the woman, like, and it's not meant to be malicious, but like if you're a woman, you hear, you're like, yeah, it's coming off as malicious or like somewhat sexist. And for the most part, like I'm not afraid to call it out if I see it. It's just never been like, it's never happened to me personally. So I guess to some degree it's unfortunate, and other degrees I kind of wish I had the opportunity to call it out if I saw it. But thankfully, like that hasn't been a problem with all the places I've been to. And oddly enough, there's been like somewhat a decent Asian American like diversity, and like Cal, like we had a coach, or she's now the special assistant head coach, she's half Asian, so like that she was already doing this before I got there, and we had players that were Asian, so I never had to experience that. And then Nebraska, I didn't experience that, although I was prepared, Colleen. I was thinking if I'm going to Big Red, like, you know, it might happen, but luckily there's a lot of people supporting me, and I always felt like I had that support.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Hope it continues.
And Shannan, I know you've talked a little bit about it already, but talk about some of the mentors that you've had along the way.
Yeah, thankfully none of them are on here, so like if I missed one, they're not going to kill me for this, but I've had a lot of mentors from the St. John's Day, or from Armando, who was the Golden City coach, in terms of empowering me to coach. That was huge for me, because when you're a high schooler and you're trying to coach 7th grade girls, you're only 4 years ahead, and you're not even 4 years ahead of them. So like there's a significant like trust that you have to build up with an adult to be someone that they're like, yeah, I want you to talk to these kids and gain their trust. So Armando was huge in empowering me to do that. And then at St. John's, Chris Mullen, like if it's not for him taking me in as a manager, I'm not anywhere near where I want to be or where I am today. Because he, like I said, the open-mindedness and then the fortitude to like, he introduced me to people like I should never have met at the time. Like I would just be dropping off something for him, giving him a coffee, and he'd be like, oh, come sit down and talk to this person. And I'm meeting like NBA executives that at the time will never remember me. It's fine. But like, I'm just like, yeah, I shouldn't be meeting these people. But because I had a open-minded and great human being in Chris Mullen and Greg St. Jean and Luca Virgilio, they were all coaches at St. John's. They didn't hesitate to introduce me to people and like, you know, just kind of tell me things like nuances about like, oh, this is how it works in the NBA or this is how it works in college basketball. Because otherwise I wouldn't know any better. I didn't play, so I didn't experience it in that end. And then I didn't have the background in terms of like my family. The only person that understood basketball is my brother, and he's younger than me. So he's going through everything a little bit after me. And then a couple more names I'll shout out. Tasha Pointer at St. John's, Veronica Mullen, she was a Dobo at St. John's too. And then Charmin Smith, who's a head coach at Cal, Kai Deli, or Wendell Farrell. They're all Cal people. April Phillips, like that was a really big, like formidable moment for me to grow because it was my first full-time job as an adult. So like they were big on like empowering me to grow in that position and not just think like, oh, you're like an intern or whatever. And then everyone at Stanford, just their work ethic and understanding what it like professionalism, what it took to really have a successful program. Like everyone at Stanford was great at that. And then right now with the Mavericks, Coach Kidd, but some of the assistant coaches have been huge to me, like Sean Sweeney, Greg St. Jean, and our player development staff. I've just been fortunate where everyone's been open to talking to me and sharing their experiences with me. So I can't even name them all, and I feel bad if I didn't. So I apologize if anyone sees this that I didn't mention you, because everyone has been huge to me.
I think it's because you built a level of trust with all of them, so they've taken you in and allow you to want to expand your own network, and that's due to your personality, Shannon. So lastly, before we do the question and answer session, what advice would you give to those seeking to enter this field or to get on working in the NBA?
The growth mindset is huge. Like I've always been told to pay your dues and pay it forward. And what I'm learning more and more is like, it's okay to ask questions. Like I used to think like, all right, you got to really plan when you're to ask a question to a coach. It's got to be a good question. It doesn't matter. If you have a question, you just got to ask it at some point, and the coach is either going to be open-minded and give you an answer, or they're not. Like, and then you don't really need to associate yourself with that coach anyways, because they weren't open-minded enough to talk to you. So like that's been really helpful to me. And I'm still trying to do it every day, you know, grow in that aspect of like asking questions and not being afraid of what they think, and like, do I seem smart enough? Am I smart enough? All that stuff. And then another thing, so two things I've recently learned from Summer League and just like, as the world is quickly evolving, empathy, like having empathy for whoever you're working with or working for, and the players, like especially in college, it's so big to have that empathy for them, because while we may think like you guys have it so good and like, you know, you didn't deal with the same struggles, like they're dealing with their own struggles. And I think COVID really brought it out of players, men and women. You know, the mental health is huge. That wasn't spoken of 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, but now it's like it comes out more often than not. So just trying to find empathy in them and find ways to teach them. Like it's not always about like talking down to them, but find ways to empower them and teach them so that they feel like confident in what they're doing and not just like I'm being berated by a coach. Yeah, so I would say those are the things. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Now, coaches that are on the Zoom here, we'd like to open it up now. I see Fafa Lu has raised his hand. We'll start off Fafa Lu with the first question of the Q&A.
Hey, Shannon. First of all, loved your philosophy, loved your talk about you coming from the ranks. And this was regards to my questions. You growing into the industry and being along with all these high-level profile, high-level veterans. How were some ways that you would develop relations with people that were 20, 30 years maybe older than you, and way more successful than you at that point?
That's a great question. And it's good seeing you in person or on the video camera. I know we talked a few times through Instagram, but it's a great question. I think one thing I've kind of learned, and I want to keep doing better, is like learning personalities. That's like a big thing I've learned from certain trainers and coaches. So like reading more about that and understanding personalities. But one thing I have understood is like people love to hear themselves talk for the most part. So like if you can just be good at asking questions and letting them talk, they're just like, oh, like cool, like I'll talk to Shannan, like sure. I'm just like, yeah, like tell me whatever you want. Sorry, my dog has joined me. This is Bandit. So I kind of like use that to my advantage. Like if you like to hear yourself talk, or like maybe not hear yourself talk, but like to talk to me. Like tell me, like how did you get to where you are? Like just tell me things that don't necessarily have to do with like advancing anyone's career. That's where I think certain people get turned off in talking to you, is like they have the inkling that like you're trying to advance your career. But like if you just try to get to know someone and their background, and like just like, hey, like how did you grow up, or talk to me about your kids and like things that you think people don't normally care about, that opens a door of like, yeah, like I'll talk to her, like cool, like that's something that I think I've tried to do. And not like with the intent of like, oh, I want him to like trust me, or I want her to trust me, but it's just genuine curiosity. Like I told you, I'm a curious person in terms of experiences. So if you can learn about other people's experience outside of just how they advanced in their career, I think that builds up a level of trust for them. And then they're like, well, come do this task for me when it comes to your work. And then you do the task, you execute it at a high level, and then their trust is like, all right, yeah, she can do this, or he can do this. Cool. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Great answer.
Great answer. Other coaches, questions?
Hey, if you don't mind, a question from a volleyball referee. Shannan, what do you think is your next job? Where do you think you're going? And is there a ceiling? Where do you want to top off at the end of your career?
Kent, that's an awesome question. Thanks for bringing fear back into my life, because I've tried to avoid thinking about it for a little while. Only because I did the job hopping so quickly. Like this time last year, I was in Nebraska. This time next month, or like last year this month, or next month, I would have been in Dallas. Started in Dallas. So like for me, I'm like, okay, please don't move anymore. Like you gotta like save your bank account and all that moving and all that stuff. So at the moment, it's hopefully in Dallas for a long time. But in terms of career, positional wise, that's something I'm trying to figure out. I've been fortunate where this position created, or I've been hired for. It has a multitude of doors and windows. There's no like set in stone, like this is your path, you have to do this. So like I'm kind of free to build on certain roles. So like how do I say that? Like what is lacking in the organization or could use like more tender love and care, that's where maybe I can grow my role if I wanted to. And then the other route is like, do I want to go down the video route again and then try to build up into player development into a coach? So that part I'm still figuring it out, Kent, to be completely honest with you. I'm not quite sure. Part of me just wants to be a star in the current role that I have, because the first year was all about learning the NBA and understanding the process. This year is like, okay, I get the process. How can I help execute at a higher level now? So I don't think I'm even thinking about my next role right now, because I believe I got to be better at this one. And that was how I was at Cal. Like I had no intention of leaving Cal after 2 years. I thought, hey, now I got my feet wet. I understand, like we had COVID, so that put me back a little bit. But I mean, you can ask Matt. I had no intention of leaving for Nebraska or doing anything else. So I guess part of that is we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. And
Yeah,
the
it's
ceiling
like-
question,
I think there's a.
I think there's a ceiling. I don't. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Oh, no.
Thank you.
Justin, you have your hand up? Justin?
Hey, Shannon. I was wondering, what do you think is a problem or a concern or challenge or anything that you might feel like people from the outside looking in as fans or whoever else don't necessarily think that you experience on a staff, working on a staff that could be of a challenge of the job?
Justin, you mean in terms of like me personally, or like someone that works in
You
a
personally,
job
like
and then
what?
people looking
Yeah.
outside?
Yeah, no, you personally, like, what do you think is something that people don't recognize about your job that you could say is a problem, concern, or challenge that you wouldn't know unless you're in that job?
Yeah. Ooh, how to think on that one. I think what and maybe it's more so the NBA, because like college, there's certain things you just can't do. Like there's certain rules. NBA, there's no rules, right? It's literally just a matter of like, did you think of it? Can you get the approval to do it? And then like go execute it. Something I think is tough in my role personally is like trying to think of the right way to phrase it, or like make sense of it. But being able to handle, doing something well, like that wasn't asked of me, that isn't technically my job title, but like in the NBA, there's no such thing as like just, oh, you only do this for your job. Like if the player development coach happens to be there and like someone needs help, like for the most part, like you help in whatever direction and whatnot. And I'm trying to think how to phrase this, but like I think I've opened myself up to where I've helped and I'm trying to help everyone, that to some degree I start to lose like the ability to just focus on the basketball and the coaching. Like I'm fortunate enough to get on the court all the time because there's no rules about that. That was huge in college, that I was getting worried about. Like at some point I got to be able to get on the court because I still have to learn how to teach on the court, because I didn't play. Like that's a huge difference. NBA, there's no rules to that. So I'm on the court every day, rebounding and like helping coaches out with players. But because some people, they need you for this, like operationally, or like, hey, there's a meeting happening now, but like there's a guy on the court, like trying to figure out like, okay, my role is to the court and to the players and the coaches. But like sometimes I've opened myself up to being like someone that they go to for operational things, and like trying not to be pigeonholed into that as a woman. You know, like, oh, she's a woman, she could do this. Like, yeah, I may be able to, whatever reason you think I'll be good at it. And like for me, I take pride in everything I do, but I got to make sure I still am able to like create that respect where like, no, she wants to be a coach and like that's what she's going to do. And so like that right now is kind of where I think that may be a problem moving forward. It's only a small problem right now, but like I told Kent, my role, it's so versatile, and I just got through like learning how the NBA works, that like this is the year I'll kind of figure out like, is that still going to be a possible problem? If that, hopefully that made some sense to you. That's a great question. You caught me off guard for sure.
No, thank you for your
that.
insight. I really appreciate it. That's awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Shannon, I have a question for you. I actually have two questions. So do you get to travel the whole year next season? My first question.
It's being talked about. I don't know right now. It's kind of in the works. It was brought up once. There's a certain part of my role that's been elevated in some things that might require me to travel, but I have no idea. Okay. I'm under the impression if you just let things happen. Okay. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If not, no worries.
Okay. Then secondly,
so I have no idea.
Yeah. I'm just curious. Have you had interactions with Mark Cuban, the owner?
He sat next to me in Salt Lake. It was so random. I was by myself at a table because like the way it works for meals, like you're not not like everyone eats at the same time. Like the meal room is open from like 7 to 10. So like if you show up at 7, you show up at 7. If you show up at 10, you show up at 10. So like you have no idea who you're running into at that point. So I'm like sitting in the meal room or sitting at a table by myself. And all of a sudden, like I'm like eating, I look up and like it's Mark Cuban with his headphones in. He had just worked out and just sitting next to me. And I was like, all right, this is cool. Like, do I even bother talking to him, or do I, let him go about his life? And he had just brought up, this was like Mike Tyson. I think he had punched someone on the plane because they were like annoying him and being disrespectful. So like he like randomly just started talking to me about it. So like we had that brief conversation. So if you want to call that us talking, but I don't think he knows who I am, which is fine. Probably try to keep it that way for as long as possible. But he's a great guy. Like he cares about the team. Like, people are like, oh, there's like a stigma to him or like a assumption of him. But like the way I see it is like this man cares about our players. So like I'd prefer that over, someone who didn't.
Right.
Or and saw players as like numbers or like whatever. So I think it's pretty cool.
Thanks.
Of course.
Any other coaches? Any more questions before we let Shannan go? Anybody else? Shannan, this was awesome.
Yeah. Hey,
thank you so
Matt,
much.
I just wanted to take a moment. I just want to take a moment and say thank you to everyone for sticking on. You definitely didn't have to, and I appreciate you guys letting me rant about nothing. So seriously, and I'll leave my information in the chat. Is that how you guys usually do it, right? That's okay?
Mhm.
I'll leave my information in the chat. If there's anything I could ever do for you guys, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's a few people here that know I'm really bad at responding in text messages, like Jacob's one for sure. Matt and Colleen have heard they told you guys about the 3 a.m. stuff, but sometimes that's like the best time for me to respond. So I apologize to you guys, but I do my best to get back to everyone. So please don't hesitate to reach out. It just might not be immediately.
You got bigger fish to fry.
I care.
Yeah.
No, don't say that, Colleen. Don't say that. There's no such thing. It's just I'm poor at. I respond in my head. That's the problem. I respond in my head when I see the message because I'm like not like I'll be working out and I see the message. I'm like, yeah, responded. And then I see like 2 days later or a day later, I'm like, I didn't respond to anyone. Like that's just crazy. So I don't know how I sell the job sometimes, but there you go. That's my spiel. I'll leave my.
I know how much you put on your plate and how much you grind, and you take all the time you need to get back to me whenever I text, whatever. I can't wait to see what's next for you. I know you're killing it in your current position, and I can't wait to see what your next position is going to be. So Shannan, thank you again for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. Seriously,
Yeah.
thank you so
Thanks for
much.
taking the time.
Thank you.
Enjoy being home.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.